Thank you. I'm glad to be here. My name is Jill Larson. I teach human nutrition at UW Green Bay. I must say that first and foremost, there's a lot going on in the dietetics field here with this, and I'm just going to do a brief summary of the dietetics thing that's going on. I'm glad to meet you and your trillions of microorganisms that you brought with you today. So I'm looking out and I'm seeing you, and I'm seeing so much more. And of course, I can't show you my trillions of microorganisms that are here with me. So to bring something tangible, I brought a weight. And there's not consensus here, but just some back of the envelope calculations say that between 0.3 to 3% of your body weight are your microbes. Right? So just to get the idea, I don't want to break anything here, and I won't put it on top of the pictures, but, oh, that's not even going to give me the size I'm looking for here. That's going to break some technology, but you know, just to bring something tangible to think about in terms of who you're carrying with you every day, and the relationships that you have with those microbes, and they have with you. And of course, like any relationship, it's complex. Right, so I can't do all the complexity in the 3 hours that Kent has allotted me. That's a 3-hour speech there. But I get something special tonight. So I just want to give you kind of a smattering of the dietetics field and really some of the emerging science. And one of the things that I've always science is when information comes on board, you know, we expand and our thinking, and we change our thinking. And there's a lot of that going on in the nutritional science field in the context of your trillions of microbes that you are bringing in here today. So fermentation, of course, is the changing of a food. Right? You can think of changing the food from cabbage to sauerkraut or kimchi, or milk to dairy, to yogurt or a kefir. In that food, there can be some of those microorganisms, and those microorganisms metabolites. You know that you've been talking about beer tonight, and following a brewer is a really tough gig to do, but of course ethanol being one of those metabolites, but there are others. So some frequent terms here, just to think about being a consumer, you know, in this market, really, in this emerging science in the dietetics field, is just to get some of these terms down. So the microbiota, or biota, is the microorganisms in a specific environment. Of course, we're talking about you being that environment, and you have many different ecosystems, really, that vary, like from deserts to rainforests. You know, your mouth is compared to the back of your hand. I mean, really are different ecosystems, and there's different microorganisms there. I'm mainly thinking about the gut, and when I say the gut, you know, the GI system, and mainly the large intestine. We'll be talking about the microorganisms that live there. And there's a variety of them, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and even some parasite relationships that maybe we've evolved with over time. There's more of those that you carry with you today than your own, which is really kind of wild to think about. And in the microbiome, I have this little asterisk here because I can't find consensus on the definition. Again, this being an emerging area of science, certainly in nutritional science and dietetics, it really is. I mean, we're seeing just the tip of the iceberg, and you can keep on going down rabbit holes, you know, looking at some of the research out there. But I put this particular definition up, the combined genetic material. And so thinking about the genes and the proteins and the different things that those microorganisms are producing in your ecosystem. So microorganism genes than your own genes. So take just a minute to look at who's sitting next to you. Do you even know them anymore? Who are they? You know, if you live in the same house, maybe you have some similarities in your microbiota. That may be true. All right, so the science keeps coming at us, right? And I thought, well, we didn't always talk about the microbiome. That wasn't really something I learned about, being, you know, nearly 150 years old now. You know, that wasn't even discussed. So this is new stuff. This is changing the way we think about some foods and how some foods may relate to us. So I thought I'd just pick a smattering, again in my 3 hours here, of compelling and pioneering research, right? Just compelling and pioneering. And I just, by these things, I just want to say, maybe it'll just make you go, I want to think about that. So one of them involves the study of mice, right? So this transfer of phenotypes, and I don't know why I can't get the, oh, there it is. So the transfer of phenotypes, so physical characteristics, through microbial transplantation in mice. So what was done is that they had mice that were germ-free, and they took, you can create that, evidently, and they took a mouse that was defined as having obesity, and how they define that in mice, I am not sure. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue right now, but the mouse had obesity and it had insulin resistance. So I don't know how much you think about this, but insulin is that hormone that regulates, glucose in our bodies, and when we think about that insulin resistance, that's one of the characteristics of type 2 diabetes, or say pre-diabetes. So those mice had were defined as fitting in the category of obese and having insulin resistance. And they took the microbiota out of the large intestine of that mouse and put it into the large intestine of the germ-free mouse. And with that, they transferred those characteristics from one mouse to another. That's pretty interesting. That's why I chose to put this one on my compelling and pioneering slide. All right. So other things. Now, if we think about, this is the mouse study, but here's some chemicals that the microbes produce. So these chemicals are producing chemicals. And the microbes are producing chemicals. We know that from the brewer who was just up here talking about ethanol. Well, they're producing other chemicals as well. So we know that a person who eats a high fiber diet, and I'll define exactly what that means in some upcoming slides, they have increased diversity of their microbiome, and those bacteria produce what are called short chain fatty acids. So short chain just means, 4 carbons, butyric acid or butyrate for those of you who read about this, but 4 carbons. And one of those short chain fatty acids, butyric acid, kind of says to the body, it says, hey, the good guys are living here. The good guys are here in the colon. Everything's going okay. Don't get your immune system all worked up. Don't get your inflammation reactions going. Everything's okay. And that's good. That's good, because you don't want your immune system to be going, hog wild, so to speak, when it doesn't need to, or is sending these inflammatory signals when it doesn't need to. So one of the things that's really being looked at is this short chain fatty acid called butyrate or butyric acid, if you want to do some of your own research on that. On the flip side, if you read anything in Harvard Health or nutrition or anything, you might have heard of TMAO. Has anybody here heard of this? This is produced when you eat, say, a lot of red meat. You're just a frequent red meat eater, and that can sometimes change up the microbiome a little bit, or you have a lot of, say, high-fat dairy products coming in, and one of the chemicals that comes in when you eat like that is something called phosphatidylcholine or L-carnitine, and the bacteria then that are living in your colon can take that and they can change it into something that has this nickname called TMAO, trimethylamine N oxide. So it has a nickname like a lot of these chemicals do. And you might say, well, who cares about that? Well, we care about that because TMAO seems to be associated with a much higher risk for stroke attack. And nobody wants that, right? So these microbes are producing chemicals that certainly are appearing to influence our health. And what we eat is influencing those microbes. So now fermented foods consumers seem to have subtle differences in their gut microbiota and those metabolites, such as, say, something called conjugated linoleic acid, which is thought to confer health benefits, like weight maintenance, like maybe type 2 diabetes. So the data continues to emerge. It really is a new field. Definitions are needed for us consumers. Definitions are oh my goodness. Definitions are needed for consumers. So I just want to go back. Our FDA really, as far as dietetics goes, doesn't give us a lot of guidance. So for example, you're out there, you're a consumer, you want to buy a product and say a supplement, for instance, and it can say on there supports digestive health. Pretty vague, right? And it doesn't have to supply a lot of evidence to do that. It can't say cures constipation. But, you know, to the consumer, to many of us, well, what in the world's the difference, right? So you really have to be careful as a consumer in this new emerging marketplace of biotics. Maybe there'll be some national food guidelines coming up in the future. I have the raspberry up here because that's a great. I'm going to be talking about fiber quickly in the upcoming slides. And I just want to credit my good friend, Dr. Angelo Kolokithis, for this picture. And I would have done it wasn't here even. But this is a human cell and bacterial cells just to show them side by side. Thank you, Angelo. So now, the you're going to be in the grocery store. There's going to be, you know, high sugar muffins saying it's got probiotics in it. So just for us consumers, real quickly to go through the definitions. Probiotics are live. Oh, gave it away. Live. So adequate amounts. Okay, that's the cap. Adequate amounts, and this needs to be defined and characterized for us consumers, you know, in this biotic marketplace, that confer a health benefit to the host. Not permanent residents in our gut. You know, if we eat them, they're transients. They're like guests at a hotel. They'll come and hang around for a little bit, but they're not permanent. A couple examples. Lactobacillus as one bacterial species that's being studied as a probiotic. Not foods. For example, anybody like sourdough? Oh, it's baked. So the microbes that were in the dough are no longer alive. But say, well, does that make a difference? Yeah, maybe. Because when those microbes were in the dough, they may have created different chemicals that may confer health benefits to us. So say, for example, again, sourdough bread, phytates might be reduced, so maybe zinc and magnesium are more bioavailable to you from that grain product. One example. So bacteria are not alive in that particular product, they still may have produced chemicals that may do us some good. Another example from sourdough is maybe a reduction in short-chain carbohydrates that we can't digest so well. If anybody's heard of FODMAPs or FODMAPs, fermentable oligosaccharides, monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polyols, if you've ever heard of that. If you have IBS, you probably have. So that may help people with irritable bowel syndrome. So here's some foods that do have live cultures in them: kefir, yogurt, most cheeses, miso, tempeh, kimchi. Can they say they have probiotics? Well, they have to, remember, be defined as conferring a health benefit and be present in adequate amounts. So maybe they might say live and active cultures instead. All right, prebiotics. In the world of biotics, prebiotics are food for the probiotics, namely fiber. So the one thing I can say is fiber is good. Eat fiber. How are you going to do that? Lots of fruit and vegetables. Fiber is good. That's maybe the most reliable way to have a healthy microbiome, is to eat fiber. Eat lots of produce, plants, vegetables, whole grains. And then I have some definition of how much that is. If you haven't done it, you can use a free app, even like MyFitnessPal, to record your diet and kind of see where you are with your fiber intake. Most of us are low. And when I say low, I mean like somewhere around 12. So that's something to think about. This is a newer term, and I'm going to go really quick on this one. The chemicals produced by the microbes. There are examples here of these chemicals that are thought to have an influence on our health. So I mentioned conjugated linoleic acid. So that's a fatty acid that's got some alternating double to single carbon bonds. It may reduce inflammation. It may modulate your immune system. It may increase your sensitivity. It may protect you against oxidative damage and cardiovascular disease. Short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, butyric acid, easy for me to say, that really help with your gut health and just kind of modulate that immune system, say everything's okay here, you don't need to do an attack or inflame. There are even functional little tiny protein-like chemicals that may modulate your blood pressure. Parts and pieces from cells and biofilms, like that slimy stuff, might be healthy for you as well. The thing is right there that it's important, now you got me going, is that fermentation can increase the nutritional value of food. So that's important. Some B vitamins, if you can be made by the microbes in your gut, like folate, B12, vitamin K, and also you can reduce some things that are quote unquote called anti-nutrients, like phytates, which sequester things like magnesium and calcium and iron. You know, so you can increase the nutritional value in addition to prolonging shelf life, and the food tastes good. Try it.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Anita.
No, not necessarily, because of this idea of postbiotics. So if I go back here, sometimes microbes produce chemicals that, even though the microbe themselves is no longer viable or alive, those chemicals can be present, or even the parts and pieces of the original microbes may confer some, in terms of like modulating the immune system, for example. So you wouldn't say, like, sourdough bread was my example, that's baked, and it still has some benefits from that original fermentation.
What's your second
Which is pretty cool, because this is really new, that term postbiotic. And now you're going to see in the marketplace symbiotic too, which is probiotic and prebiotic. So for us as consumers, it's really going to be the wild, wild west.